What I thought I would do today is to start off by, I guess, start off with a caveat that you're going to learn nothing new today. All right. And the reason you're going to learn nothing new is that I have this firm belief and opinion that I always get asked, what's the difference between behavioral econ and design and human factors? And essentially, they're all the same thing, right? I think they're all in the empathy business. They're all about trying to understand what the other person does, and then can we design products and services based on that understanding. Our methods are different. There are lots of sort of specific things by which we are different. Our theoretical roots are different, but essentially we are all in that. So you will learn nothing surprising, but hopefully you'll learn a new lens on looking at the work that you do in terms of design. So let me quickly introduce myself. That's my name. I run a center called BEAR, Behavioral Economics in Action at Rothman. We work with lots and lots and lots of partners, including several federal governments and provincial governments and hospitals and for-profit companies, not-for-profits, in areas that range from financial inclusion to preventive health, food systems, diversity inclusion, environment sustainability, essentially things where behavior change is the fundamental challenge as opposed to the technology or the science. So that's that. And then the other little thing that you need to know about me is that I'm an engineer by training. So I tend to see, I'm a mechanical engineer, so I kind of tend to see the world as boxes connected by pipes. And behavior change is nothing more than moving people from one box to another box through a clean pipe, right? And so I'll kind of make that metaphor a little bit more concrete as we go through. So having said all of that, the other thing I want to say is that I'm going to become a pumpkin at 12:50 or so because I need to be at a meeting. But in the 47 or 55 minutes or so that we have, feel free to take the conversation any way you want. So questions, comments, anything is welcome. I have slides, but I don't need to stick to them. So even the online folks, just feel free to jump in and ask anything you want. So I'm going to call my conversation today the architecture of choice. And it will hopefully become apparent why. But let me begin by making a fundamental claim, which I think is not controversial. And the claim is that all of us are in the business of behavior change. And again, like I said, this could be a government, it could be you guys, it could be me as an educator. And in fact, I'd actually make a stronger claim that anybody who is not in the business of behavior change is not in a business worth doing at all. Right? So every organization, so be it sort of a compliance kind of behavior change, which is government wants me to do things for a set of regulations, switching or purchasing could be all forms. I drink chai, you want me to drink that green liquid, that's a switch behavior. Or I use a Samsung product and Apple wants me to switch to their product, that's switching. I take the escalator, I should be taking the stairs. You can think about all kinds of switching behaviors, right? Consumption, turns out it's a big thing. So oftentimes we struggle with getting people to consume all kinds of things. Information is a big one, and I'll give you an example of that in a minute. But medication, it's a huge problem, right? So one of the projects we're working on with the health board in Singapore is to see what we can do through interventions to help people stick to their medication regimes. It's a particularly big problem for certain classes of medication. So I'm a classic example. Look at my brown skin. Pretty easy to tell that I'm South Asian ethnically. And as you probably know, one of the things that comes with being South Asian is cholesterol problems, right? So I and every single male in my family have high cholesterol. And so the doctors put me on statins. And obviously every single pill of statin doesn't make me feel any different, right? And so, you know, in domains like that, diabetes medication, birth control pills, where there is no immediate feedback that the medication is actually working, it is easy to see why people stop taking medication, right? So that's a big challenge as well. And then acceleration, the idea that all of us have great intentions to do good things in the future, but how do we get people to do those things now before it is too late, right? So 4 broad classes of behavior change. The second claim I'm going to make is most organizations are really bad at this stuff. for various reasons. I think there's kind of organizational issues, there's sort of the fear of the unknown. So technology and science and innovation, these are things that companies are good at doing. They know how to do it. It happens within the four walls of the institution. Behavior change requires going outside. It requires talking to people. What a concept. It requires understanding psychology, which is, as you know, a hard thing to do. And one of the big challenges I find is behavior change is hard because most organizations have a very flawed model for thinking about how their stakeholders make decisions. All right? And I'm going to start using language. This is going to hurt to see, but that's okay. From a book called Nudge, which was written by my thesis advisor, Richard Taylor, and Cass Sunstein, where they make a distinction between econs and humans, right? So econs in their language are utility maximizers, right? These are people that write out utility functions. They make choices by thinking about what gives them the greatest benefit. They are forward-looking. They are self-interested. They can compute at the speed of light. They don't have emotions. They are, very focused on the task at hand. They can consume copious pieces of information. They're basically hypothetical people, right? They only exist on the pages of economics textbooks. Human beings are different. So this is an example of human beings, right? And you can look at this picture and say, well, why are these people taking the escalator to go to the gym, right? And you can come up with all kinds of responses. I think the most common one I hear from economists is the following. These people expect to spend energy in the gym, so they're saving it now. And that's kind of like a forward-looking, rational view of human behavior. There's a second story, which is that this guy in the dark blue shirt saw the person in the light blue shirt take the escalator, so they decided to do the same. And it turns out that that sounds trivial, but it explains a heck of a lot of human behavior, right? Which is the notion that people do what other people do without knowing why those other people do what they do. And so oftentimes this works really well as an influence mechanism. We did a project several years ago with the UK tax administration, the Behavioral Insights team in the United Kingdom. If anyone here has lived in the UK and has ever received a letter from Her Majesty's Revenue Service, you know, A, it is long, B, it is utterly incomprehensible. Right? It's written in the Queen's English. Their shortest letter is 4 pages long. And in fact, the shortest letter in the standard repertoire of Her Majesty's Revenue Service letters is a nice, polite reminder to people that you're probably going to be late in paying your taxes. Please pay them on time. It takes 4 pages to say that, right? And so we said, well, look, this is utterly complicated, right? Can we simplify the letter? And the response is no. At 21 approvals, it's probably going to take 5 years. Could we add stuff to the letter? Sure, like anytime, right? And so we just added a box at the top of the letter. So as soon as you open the letter, threefold, it came out, there was a big, bold thing saying, please pay your taxes on time. That was it, right? And it turns out that had an effect, right? People, they didn't need to read the letter because that's what it was. But then we started doing the dark blue shirt, light blue shirt intervention. We said things like 90% of people in the UK pay their taxes on time, won't you? Right? Now all of a sudden more people started paying taxes on time. Right? And then in a multi-arm trial, we tried different variations of the message. So we'd say things like 90% of people in your county pay on time, and even more people pay on time, and 90% of people in your zip code pay on time. The more precise you make the comparator group, the more likely were people to do what other people did. Everybody's doing it. I might as well do this. Of course, the caveat is you can't blindly use this for behaviors that most people don't do, right? So we've actually, in the interest of science, tried behaviors like that, which is 8% of people drink kale juice every day for lunch. Won't you? And then people are saying, well, you know what, that makes no sense, right? Or only 7% of people pay taxes on time. How about you, right? Well, everybody's messing up. Might as well do the same, right? So you got to be careful about having the data. But that's the second story that I think explains this this picture. There is a third story, which I think is the most prevalent story, which is I'm actually convinced that these people weren't thinking at all. That was nothing, right? They probably came from this side of the picture. The escalator was there, and they stepped on it. Okay? And it turns out, so I call this decision making by default. What's by default? It's like choosing to do nothing. All right, and it turns out a lot of our decisions are actually made by default, right? So, should I get signed up to be an organ donor? I was downstairs, and there's a big. No, because the default is that nobody's doing it, right? It requires effort to be an organ donor, right? And it's easier to not do it. And so there's a famous paper in Science, 2003, that compares a bunch of European countries, opt in, opt out, and it shows the same thing. But again, the idea is that oftentimes people just don't deliberate when they make a decision, right? And if we can then create a context to steer people as a function of that, we're going to call that choice architecture. So back to my claim about companies not being good at behavior change, I think I'll try and summarize it this way, right? I have a feeling that most companies design products and services and processes for these people when in fact these people use them, right? And so we just finished a large project in Mexico working on their pension system. There's a simple question of why do Mexicans not save enough for retirement? And I'm not about to describe the entire system, but if you are ever familiar with the Mexican pension system, I'm not sure why it would be, it is the world's most complicated, not just pension system, any system, right? So there's a mandatory contribution, then there's a voluntary contribution, which you need to make to meet government targets. The government changes the targets every year. In an attempt to make contributions easy, you can do it online, you can do it at your local 7-Eleven, you can do it on your phone, but you can only do it once at a time. And then every single contribution you make, you could go again in person to do it. There are 275 different funds you can contribute to. It's a mess, right? And when we speak to CONSAR, who is the pension authority in Mexico, about the fact that it's complicated, their standard response is, oh no, but we told people on page 57 of the prospectus that they needed to do it. Or we gave them a calculator, right? And it turns out people don't read stuff. I mean, telling people has no effect on anything. So when I teach, for example, I mean, I prepare these lengthy syllabi, which nobody reads, and I know nobody reads, right? So I assume that people don't read syllabus. And I think we should assume that people don't read our flyers or communication or warning labels or nothing, right? So I think we obviously, I don't need to tell you this, but we need to design for humans and not for econs, right? So the field of behavioral economics kind of evolved in trying to understand how human behavior is different from econ behavior, right? And so a lot of the early efforts were in terms of trying to model in a utility sense what human behavior looks like. And I'm going to give you a laundry list of different things. But let me sort of just focus on a couple of things. The first thing I want to focus on is more of an applied piece than a theory piece, which is we're often taught in MBA programs and college and training sessions to think big, come up with big ideas, right? And I think that's kind of bad advice. I think we're going to think small. Right? And what I mean by thinking small is that there are often really small frictions that prevent behavior change. Okay? So one of the biggest challenges in the healthcare world, I mean, there's lots, but one big one is, how do I get people to see their doctor for their annual checkup? That's a big challenge, right? So I did a project several years back with an insurance company in the US. It's the standard insurance product, health insurance. You've got your prescription plan, your vaccinations, yada, 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 and an annual checkup, right? And it turns out that if you study people that were members of the plan, these are people that had paid for an annual checkup, only 17%, 1/7, actually got their checkup, right? And so the insurance company obviously did the usual stuff. They hired a market research company to survey people and ask them why they didn't get their annual checkup, and guess what? The most common answer was too busy. Right? And that's wrong. That's a lie. Nobody's too busy to not have an hour in a year to go see a doctor, right? So it's got to be something else. And so, long story short, essentially, one of the interventions we did for the subsequent year is that we would randomly assign people to appointments. We say, Anjum, thank you for buying the product. June 16, 10:30 a.m. I booked you with Dr. X. Should you not be able to make it, give us a call. Right? Now, all of a sudden, 67% showed up. You know, that's a big jump, right? Not like 70 to 67. They weren't busy at all. They just didn't want to make the call. Right? And so that's the small thinking there. It's the little stuff that actually trips people up. And I know nobody likes to make calls nowadays, I think, right? So I see, like, I was just looking at my kids' phone bills, like millions of text messages, like 0 minutes on call time. It's amazing. Like, people don't like to call. And so those are the kinds of frictions we need to think about. It's the little stuff and not the big stuff. So back to the notion of, so that's my checkup story, behavioral economics. So like I said, there's a big list of things that economists have tried to study in terms of what do these factors mean for economic decision-making, for rationality. And this is my attempt at condensing everything into 3 things. Right? So there's three sets of things that drive decision making. One is the notion of context and the idea that people get value not from the thing that they're valuing, but from the context in which they value the thing. And I'll give you an example of that in a couple of minutes. Procrastination, which is the idea that everybody has great intentions for the future. So you ask anyone, would you like to save more for retirement? Like, everybody says yes, right? Will you do it now? Like, no. How about tomorrow? Sure. Right? And it's happened to all of us. I mean, 10 years ago, like a good Canadian, I promised myself that I would be fluent in my second language. And so I signed up to take classes. And today, I still promise myself that someday I will be fluent in my second language. And I still plan to take classes. But, life gets in the way. Right? So it's a big challenge. Procrastination is a huge challenge. And you can model that in economics by looking at what we call intertemporal discounting functions. And then finally, inertia, right? This whole notion of kind of defaults, right? Inertia is like the second law of motion. Objects at rest remain at rest. That's the, in the behavioral world, that's pure inertia. People don't act unless you get them to act. And objects in motion remain in motion, which is habit. Okay? So it's the same story. Now, it turns out there's very gentle ways in which you can break inertia. It doesn't take a whole lot to break inertia. And so I'm going to give an example of a study that was done in Dartmouth a few years back that we replicated at SICKITS 3 years ago. And that was a study involving flu shots. So all of us know we should get flu shots. Many of us don't get them for various reasons. It's not an intention problem. It's not an awareness problem. It's just, life gets in the way, right? So in the original study at Dartmouth, this was at the Hitchcock system of hospitals. Email goes out in late September to everybody on staff saying, flu season is here, usual spiel. Show up at any point in time next week in the atrium for your flu.
Julia, can you mute yourself online?
Okay. Now, the one thing I've learned is if you want to get people to change behavior, telling them that they could do it anytime is like precisely the worst thing you could do, right? Because they procrastinate. So one of the things that the researchers did was 3-arm trials. So the email that went out said exactly what I said, flu season is here, here are the risks, etc., etc. Second version of the email changes the subject line. It says, will you get your flu shot next week?
My favorite time of the day is lunchtime. We're going to be back at 1 o'clock for my favorite time of the day, and that's the afternoon set of sessions. Back at 1 o'clock today.
It's okay. I thought I said something profound. Shall I go?
Yeah. You
Continue? Okay. Where were we? Flu shots. So question mark, right? Will you get your free flu shot next week? Question mark. And then at the end, it said, again, the same question, same information. Will you get your free flu shot? Yes, no. You did not have to respond. It was a rhetorical question. But it turns out that amongst the people who got the original email, 47% got their flu shot. In the new email, 62% got their flu shot, right? And the reason for the difference is very simple. The reason is the fact that by asking the question, you have put people in a mindset where they're processing the information that they've got with a view to answering that question. Right? It's a very goal-oriented kind of question, right? And I bet you everybody here has struggled with sort of this problem of sending emails to which nobody responds. I've been guilty of that, I know, at some point in time. But if you put a question mark in your subject line, you will get a response. Right? It may not be the one you want, but you'll get it, right? Because again, people then read the question or read the email with a view to coming up with a response, right? Otherwise, it's just information. Okay. Now there was a third version of that same email, same subject line, same text, same ending, but instead of saying yes or no, it said yes because I care about my health and the health of my kids and my family and my patients and so on and so forth, versus no, I don't care, 82%. Right? So again, just goes to show that with very small interventions, you can get fairly significant changes in behavior. So that's the inertia story. But let me jump to context, and I want to do that with a couple of examples. The first one is this one. This is page 1 of 27 pages of Instagram's privacy policy. Okay. Now, for the purpose of today, let's keep aside the discussion of whether Instagram wants you to read this privacy policy or not. It's a separate debate. But I got interested in this back, I think it was like 6 years back when Instagram was launched. My then teenage son was sitting in the living room with his tablet computer doing this. Like literally, I kid you not, this is what he was doing, right? I said, Neil, what are you doing? And he said, well, Dad, I've just downloaded this like really cool new thing, photo sharing app, and all of my friends are using it. And this is everything I need to agree with before I can start using it, right? And his choice of words struck me as interesting, right? This is the thing that I need to agree with before I can use it. So I went back and I didn't know anything about Instagram. They had just, begun life as a company. So I traced them. I, got onto a plane, spent a week with them just to get to understand the business. But one of the things I learned was they had actually hired a team of 27 lawyers and legal assistants who did nothing for 7 months but draft this document, which nobody reads. Right? And I will say that if you look at all of the privacy policies of every single online business, this is one of the nicest, well-written documents. It was written with the view of getting people to read it. But the point is, nobody reads it. And then you start thinking about this as a behavioral scientist and say, why aren't people reading it? And part of the problem is it's long. But the timing is the worst possible timing that you can deliver it at. Right? So the thing about my son, he spent 4 minutes of his precious life downloading this thing. And now I prevent him from doing it unless he reads 27 pages. I mean, that's bad. Right? And so we've been working with the Privacy Commissioner's Office in Ottawa to see, well, what if we let people download and use things without, with a very basic privacy policy that they consent to with the first usage, but the second time they open it, then the full thing pops up. And we've done some experiments, and it turns out people are much more likely to read the second time, right? But that's one element of the context, the timing. Right? That same thing delivered at a different time could have a much different impact on decision making than when you deliver it before allowing people to use the product. So one example of context, right? Here's another one. Coffee. Right? So I love coffee. I was actually on sabbatical from the university about 12 years ago. I had nothing to do. And so the sabbatical is a wonderful thing. It's basically you work hard for 7 years, and then the university gives you 6 months to go and broaden your intellectual horizons or whatever it is, right? So I decided to broaden mine in the domain of coffee. All right, and I was interested in a couple of things. One is I was interested in kind of figuring out how much coffee is sold in the world. I mean, just like, idle curiosity questions. And then I was interested in coffee shops and what they sold and how much of what they sold. And so I called up hundreds of coffee shops all across the world, right? And I learned a few things. The first thing I learned was that with the exception of Starbucks, every coffee shop sells coffee in 3 sizes, small, medium, large, all different things. I learned that the medium cup of coffee is the most popular cup of coffee. About 70% of all units of coffee sold in coffee shops all across the world are sold in the medium cup of coffee. Not surprising. But then I also learned that there's absolutely no consistency of how much coffee is in the medium cup of coffee across the world. Right? Forget across the world, like even in Toronto, right? So if you come to my office, you'll see lots of coffee shop cups there. This one is about 13.5 ounces. This is your coffee shop downstairs. Timmy's does 11. Timothy's does 14. Second cup does 12.5. They're all different, right? And at the end of the day, most people have no clue how much coffee is in their cup of coffee. Right now, if I start viewing coffee consumption from an economics perspective, there's some kind of marginal diminishing utility of consuming every ounce of coffee, and I'm going to choose that level of consumption so that my delta of satisfaction is equal to the delta of the marginal cost. That's what economics tells me. People don't do that. They pick the medium one, right? And so we say, well, what happens when we change the sizes that are available, right? So this was actually an experiment that I did in Hong Kong in 2008. It was done in a large office building, like Hong Kong style 70-story office building in the atrium. And what was nice about that was it had the same clientele coming in day after day, right? So this was 8 ounces, 10 ounces, 12 ounces, the apple the best IFC in Hong Kong. 70% people picked that, much like what I learned in my survey. I stopped people as they were leaving and I asked them, well, why did you pick that size, right? And it was kind of like, talking a Goldilocks story with most people, right? They say things like, this one is too little and that one is too much, and that's just right. Okay, I mean, some of them are more scientific about it. So I kind of wrote down everything with the clipboard and pencil and all of that stuff, and then thanked them. And then after 3 weeks, we got rid of this guy, and we added a larger size there. I mean, kept track of sales. It took about 2.5 hours for the new medium to become the most popular size. Just over 2 hours, right? So now people that were consuming 10 basically were consuming 12. All right, and then I stopped them and I asked them why, and they said the same thing. The little one is too little, the big one is too much, right? And we've done versions of this where we've changed prices, not changed the prices, changed the sizes of the extreme, like it always works, like no matter what, right? And so there's lots of things that stand out. So the idea is simple, right? The idea is that people are making their judgment about the value of coffee sizes, not on how much coffee is in it, but from the assortment, right? They don't want to be like the littlest and they don't want to be the biggest, and they pick the one in the middle. So the fact that the assortment changed their preference was interesting, right? But the fact that they had no clue that the assortment changed their preference was even more interesting. Right? And it turns out that this kind of works in very, very insidious ways in all kinds of things, right? So financial markets, right? It turns out that everybody sort of knows that there's a risk-return trade-off when you invest. Right? Risk is a bad thing, return is a good thing. Right? So if I give people 3 options, guess what they do? They pick the one in the middle, right? I don't want to be too risky. I don't want to be too safe. I don't want to be too greedy. I don't want to be too tame, right? They pick the one in the middle. And in fact, Richard Taylor and Shlomo Banat, who is a professor at UCLA, they've actually studied financial markets where they've compared the ability to predict what stocks people invest in as a function of what are called fundamentals. I mean, how strong the stock is, and the usual crap that your wealth manager gives you, versus how it was arranged on a page, and they find that the arrangement actually matters more than all the information we give them. Right? So nobody's looking at like those fancy graphs that kind of go up like that. Right? Nobody looks at that, right? They just arrange it by risk and return, and they pick the one in the middle, right? So this is another sort of dominant example of context. Now, here's the other example, which is related to that. Petro-Canada pulled this one on us about 10 years ago. Back then, we used to get 87, 89, and 91. And one fine day, I kind of, this was gas station in Avenue and Eglinton, right? I've been buying petrol at this gas station for like years and years and years, and I stopped, and I took this picture because they started selling octane 94. Right? I said, well, that's interesting. And why is it interesting? It's interesting because my first job was in engineering. Like I said, I was used to design car engines. And I remember from back then that no car actually needs octane 94. And my question is, why is Petro-Canada selling us things that you don't need? Right? And like I said, 10 years have passed, and I still don't know the answer to that question. But I do know that the sales of 91 have gone up. What is that? That was me. Okay. So oftentimes these decisions are incredibly hardwired. They're not sort of deliberative decisions. People aren't sort of sitting making trade-offs between two extra octane ratings versus what is the difference in price is. They just instinctively pick the one in the middle, right? And so that's a classic example of how context can change preferences. Okay. So let me move on a little bit and talk about behavior change more broadly, right? So I actually tease apart the concept of behavior change into two things, right? You've got to basically create the reason, convince people that they need to change behavior, which I think is the easy part. Then you actually have to get them to do it. That's the hard part, right? We tend to think about those two things as one and the same thing. They're very, very different things. So in our country, for example, in the world of financial well-being, we had a task force under the Harper administration, which spent millions of dollars, well, not millions, thousands of dollars, $1 million, I think, right? Doing research to essentially come to the conclusion that Canadians aren't financially secure. They don't save enough for retirement and that, right? And so then they started spending millions of dollars every year from then on to teach people about the importance of financial literacy, right? And it turns out teaching people made no difference to their financial well-being, right? Because people kind of, you were changing that, but not that. Right? And so behavior change is, think about it as selling the idea plus enabling the change, right? And I think when we, as hospitals and governments and companies think about convincing people or getting people to change behavior, we focus a lot on this and not so much on this, right? And all the action is there in enabling change. So the way I see the market for behavior change is I think that there are three kinds of segments, if you will, right? The red apples are, the motivated folks, the enthusiasts, right? You tell them that it's important to donate organs, they'll do it, right? So the red apples in you will go down at the end of this talk and just sign up to be an organ donor if you haven't already. Then there's a bunch of people who are never going to do it, right? Ethically, morally, religion, personal principles, my wife doesn't like it, and all kinds of things, right? We try and spend too much money and time and energy trying to convince these people when it's really a hard thing to do, right? It's the green apples, it's the Granny Smiths that are the interesting segment. They're interesting because they like the idea, but they just don't do it. Right? So you've got to help them do it. So in the world of financial well-being, for example, right, defaulting people into retirement plans is a simple way of getting the Granny Smiths into the action zone. You can opt out if you want to, but by default, you will have a retirement plan. So it's the yes, I'll do it tomorrow segment that is the challenge. So let me do the following. I'm going to give you one story to illustrate the metaphor for that segment, and then I'll open it up for questions and comments. Okay? And that story is about Clocky, the alarm clock. Anyone seen this? Okay. So again, several years ago, my wife gave me this JAMA article, which basically said that people who wake up early in the morning are like happy, successful, lots of good things, right? So I kind of figured I should try and be those things, right? And I kind of said, like maybe there's no causality, but whatever, I'll try waking up, right? So I'd go to bed every day at 10 p.m. and set my alarm for 5:45, right? I had no idea what I was going to do at 5:45, but I figured I'd wake up and figure it out. And at 5:45, there was a different me in my head. I think about the idea, the model that we use in behavioral economics is the model of time-dependent preferences, right? Your preferences at time t1, which is at 10 p.m., are different from your preferences at 5:45 a.m. You can actually construct complex models of multiple time preferences. Let's not go there. The simple story is that the 10:45 or the 5:45 a.m. version of me essentially curses the 10 p.m. version. Right? So think about the first version of me as the planner, right? And then the second version as the doer. All right. And the problem is that life empowers the doer much more than the planner. Okay, in many ways, right? So you can plan to be on a diet, but life throws out the occasional cake shop on your walk home, and there's nothing you can do about it. Or in the case of waking up, the planner has every good intention of waking up by 5:45, but the doer gets something called a snooze button, and they can just hit it repeatedly, and nothing that the planner has said is going to matter anymore. So, by the way, the one thing I learned at that point in time is if you've got an alarm clock plugged into the wall and you snooze 8 times successively, it gives up on you. I don't know if you knew that, right? But the fact that I know that is disturbing. So I ran into Clocky, right? So Clocky is this beautiful product. You can see it's got wheels. You can see it's about to jump off the table. You can't see it very well in this picture, but there's a sensor on the top. And the sensor will let you hit snooze once, right? And the second time it detects your hand in the vicinity of the snooze button, it basically runs away from you, right? And the sensor will look for places to hide underneath. Its tone escalates with time. In my case, it was the middle of a king-size bed. And the idea is that by the time you find Clocky and silence him, you are so awake. There is no way you're going to go back to sleep. All right? Now, metaphorically, what does that mean? That essentially means it's the device that empowers the planner. Right? The planner kind of knows that the doer is going to mess up, and so the planner needs to impose some sort of a constraint on the behavior of the doer. So you can think about the following idea. When you want to get people to change behavior, you can get them to pre-commit. Right? Everybody in their right mind will pre-commit to doing all kinds of things. Right? I want to spend more time with my kids. I want to eat a healthier diet. Like nobody's going to say, no, I don't want to do those things. Right? So get them to commit. And then build in some sort of a lock. Right? Those locks could be technological in this case. They could be social. They could be economic contracts. There's a website called stick.com. If you've never tried it, you should. STICKK, where you can go in and make any public commitment and put stakes on it. Right? So without going into the mechanics of how the website works, I used it when I was writing a manuscript for my book. I basically went in. I said I need to finish this manuscript by March the 10th. Stick asked me how much was it worth to me to finish my manuscript by that date, and I said it was worth $4,000 because that's what the publisher was going to deduct for my check if I did not deliver the manuscript on time, right? So it took the money from me and kept it, right? And then it's got this contract mechanism where it sort of asks you a bunch of profiling questions, and if you do not finish the goal on time, it will donate the money not to a charity of your choice, but to a charity that it believes you will be completely and utterly opposed to, which in my case was a Trump campaign. Okay, so I basically used Flocky, woke up every morning, and I finished the manuscript, right? But so that's an economic contract, right? You can think about sort of buddy systems as social contracts, right? There's all kinds of contracts. But in general, this whole notion of pre-commitment and then essentially putting a law matters. So in sum, there are different ways in which you could think about behavior change, right? There is restrictions, right? A versus B, if you just make A unavailable, people will have to choose B, right? Now, as a government, I could do it. I could ban A. As Apple, I could do it by putting friction costs. So every time Apple launches iPhone X, it just becomes hard to operate X-1 for various reasons, right? The cord doesn't fit, or they slow the phone down, or it's just not available in the store. Restrictions are costly. It's like passing a law in this country. It takes forever. And people don't like you for it. Right? So many years ago, New York Mayor Bloomberg tried to ban large-size sugary drinks, right? And of course, it never became law. But even today, when you talk about Bloomberg in New York, the common reaction was the guy who tried to ban my Coke, right? So he did not get a good rap for it. So that's one approach, right? And sometimes it's the right thing to do. Okay? So I think we should absolutely ban guns, for example, or other harmful substances, right? There's no point in incentivizing people not to shoot other people. That's like stupid, right? Information is the other strategy, right? Like, we persuade people. We give them data. We tell them why option B is better than option A. Works generally well, except that people now live in a information overload world, right? And so the more information we give people, the less likely are they to actually use that information. So we've got to be careful about that. Incentives, again, work well in the short run, right? You can essentially, give a carrot, you can use a stick, you can give, tax rebates, you can give, discounts, all kinds of things. But again, the research is fairly clear on this. Is the moment you withdraw the incentives, people tend to revert back to their old behavior, right? And so one of the interesting healthcare incentive stories in Canada is an app called Carrot Rewards, right? You've probably seen it, heard them. And so when we've been working with them for the past year, and essentially what we're pushing them to do is to develop what we call a weaning off strategy, right? You can't give people like points to walk for the rest of their lives, right? It's just like, it's not the right thing to do, they satiate. So again, great for the short term, not clear that it works in the long run. And then finally, choice architecture, right? Make it easy, right? Put the right thing or the thing that you want as the default, put it in the middle of assortment of options. We know that context changes choices. Can we use context? Can we create context to steer people towards the right choice? And I just put these four up there, not because I think any one of them is better than the other, but I think we need to start thinking about all four simultaneously as we think about behavior change. Okay? So let me shut up for now and take questions or comments or suggestions or anything.
If anyone online has any questions, feel free to type it in the chat or unmute yourself and ask.
Okay, nobody wants to ask the first question, so how about the second one? Yeah.
No questions yet online.
Yes. Yes.
Thanks, Dilip. So I have an interesting question. I love all the examples you provided today. And so a lot of the work our center is doing, at least on the e-health innovation side, we're working with chronic disease management. And so just two comments. Actually, one is I was actually at school, public health school during the soda ban.
Gotcha.
So it was interesting, just as a comment, that I saw the backlash happen, but I always found it interesting that public health doesn't engage or hadn't at the time engaged with behavioral science as much as it should have, and it's kind of a shame to that side note. But with chronic disease management, especially kind of what public health does, sort of chronic disease management as well as prevention, the choice is, I think, more dissonant from like the behavior changer, or you have to make choices over and over again, the right choice over and over again to actually have the behavioral outcome that you're looking for. So I want to ask about what you see the opportunities for behavioral science for longer term healthcare opportunities, as opposed to like an organ donation choice or a choice to, you know, do something, a task at hand, versus how do we get people to make the right choice over and over again over long periods?
So before I get to the bigger question, I want to actually comment on organ donation. So I actually think organ donation is a long-term choice, right? Because there's obviously, it's a two-part process. You've got to consent and then your family has to consent. And so Wales, for example, 3 years ago moved the default. They used to be opt-in, then they moved to opt-out. They just released a paper last month saying that the experiment has been a failure, right? And the reason it's been a failure is that when you default people into being organ donors, they don't talk with their family, right? So you win the earlier battle, you get lots of tall bars in your science paper, but it doesn't mean that more organs get harvested, right? So I think at the end of the day, we need to think about this whole thing as a pipeline of different decisions. Sometimes the pipeline has 2 stages, sometimes it has 10, 15, 20. I should have a little picture of a pipeline here, just to make the point, which I can't go to now. Maybe I can. There's my pipeline, right? So I normally think about public health as sort of many small decisions, right? Sometimes it's a messy process. You've got to actually think about each decision separately, and maybe there's an incentive that works for some, and choice architecture intervention, but sometimes it's just about habit or building an identity, right? So I don't have a good example based on my work in the public health domain, but in financial health, we do a fair bit of work in the global south, you know, Bangladesh, India, Vietnam, Thailand, where you can get people to save money by nudging them and sort of defaulting them into certain decisions. That works really well for the first year or so, right? But then you have to empower them. And the way you do it is by giving them an identity. So we create self-help groups, and we nominate you as the financial leader of the group, right? And the moment you're the leader, you can't now not be vigilant in your own district, right? So I suspect there are sort of equivalent interventions like that, but it's getting people started that I think is the hard part, right? I mean, once people start, then things like identity and habit become different. So I know that's not a great answer to your question, but that's the way I think we think about it.
We have a couple questions online. So first, what kind of changes did work with care awards led to? A couple more. How do we make sure the behavioral changes stick for life? An example?
Yeah. So again, I think that goes back to your comment as well, which is I actually don't think we know that they stick for life, and I think that's why kind of in the work we do, a lot of people believe that behavioral science is a magic silver bullet, right? You change the default, and suddenly people are going to be healthy, or you give them incentives, and they'll start exercising more. And I have a couple of things to say. One is this notion of context dependence, which tells us that just because an intervention worked somewhere else at some other point in time is no guarantee that it will work now and here, right? And so testing is important. Continuous testing is important. The other comment I want to quickly make is the fact that the nature of evidence in behavioral science is very different from the nature of evidence, say, in the medical science or chemistry or physics, right? I don't know, anywhere in the world, I take this and I drop it, just fall onto the ground. I mean, I don't need to kind of test it, right? But if I go to Mars, then maybe it won't, and on the moon it might float, and so on and so forth, right? And so think about our planet as sort of a large-scale universe in behavioral terms, right? Context plays a huge role in the effectiveness of behavioral interventions, right? And so in medical sciences, we can actually look at a published paper and say, oh yeah, you know, this intervention, you know, this injection actually cured a certain disease in Africa. It'll probably do the same thing here, right? Can't say the same for behavioral interventions. And so again, back to the notion of testing, I think it is central to everything we do. And so yes, there is never a guarantee, but I think we need to continuously test to make sure. What do I think about the restriction on unvaccinated kids made by schools in Italy and parts of the US? Oh gosh, do I want to say anything about this? I'm all in favor of it, right? Because it's different. Like it's a different story from people not saving enough for retirement, where the consequences are yours and yours alone, right? Public health interventions are different. I'm in favor. Now, I think the question is how do we better communicate those restrictions, right? We are facing a similar challenge in this country with carbon pricing. Is carbon pricing good? Yes, it's an amazing intervention, right? But most people don't know what it is, and most people think it's basically a tax. And so I think there's a communication challenge which goes above and beyond the restrictions that they talk about here. Other questions?
We only have a few minutes left.
Yeah.
So get one more.
Question.
Yeah.
Wondering, you emphasize the importance of testing. I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about like different considerations to take into when you are testing, and especially for large scale versus smaller scale. Do you pilot first for the large scale?
Yeah, so if you actually go to our web pages, you'll see a white paper called the ladder of evidence, right? And it kind of lays out a pathway for how we want to test. So we think about a pathway going from sort of very standard, lab testing or survey-based research or ethnographic research to in-lab experiments with hypothetical choices to lab experiments with consequential choices to randomized controlled trials. We kind of use it sequentially to make sure that we rule out the dirt solutions earlier on in the process, right? On that note, the way we approach things like journey mapping, for example, in behavioral sciences is very different from the way people do it in design, right? In design, when people plot out a journey map, they talk about what actually happens, right? In the behavioral science, we talk about what should happen, okay? And then we compare it with what actually happens to see where the drop-offs are. And so comparing the what should happen with what actually happens map is a good starting point to see where's the difference? Where are people falling off the pipeline? So we then take those things to the lab, we try and design interventions, we'll, like I say, rule out the easy ones, and then eventually take it to scale in a randomized control trial. So our organ donation work with the province, for example, we did this back 4 years ago in the old registry regime. We did 7 lab experiments where we eliminated lots of potential interventions. We had 3 factors that we tested in the field, and we did that in a fully graph design across 82 service Ontario locations across the province. And then I think every year we repeat the whole process. So yes, it's rigorous, very rigorous.
Can you repeat the name of the white paper you just mentioned?
The ladder of evidence.
And then just out of curiosity, I'm wondering, out of all of these different experiments that you've run and different interventions, like, is there any that stand out as like the most surprising?
No, I think the best ones are the ones that are least surprising. Right? But I mean, I guess I am surprised by how lazy human beings are. I kind of knew it, but I'm shocked at how, like, the magnitude is stunning, right? So just on that, we did a study comparing how people look at information on desktop computers versus tablet computers versus mobile phone screens, right? Same information, everything held constant. And it turns out that when people are viewing information on a desktop, they are most likely to focus on what is presented on the top of the screen because the scrolling costs in a desktop are the highest, right? If you take a mouse, click on the sidebar, and then keeping it clicked, you have to roll it down, right? Compared to a tablet where you just do that. And we can actually see those effects. So if you look at, top 20 lists on a desktop versus a tablet, the top 20 list, the order doesn't matter as much on a tablet computer because it's easy to scroll up and down, whereas on a desktop, it does. The top 10 matter more than the second 10. So I guess that's surprising. Yeah.
Sorry, another one here. So I think there's a lot of growing appetite for organizations themselves to get involved with doing more behavioral science work. It's traditionally been done as you know, through government and academics. So again, two-part question. One, like, do you think that is, you know, kind of, do you think that organizations can take that initiative and start beginning to apply these principles, you know, without having the support and sort of the rigor of having the academics and the research or the government agency behind them? And if so, what are the best tools that they can refer to or use to be able to do that?
Okay, so you probably can't see this, but if you can actually think about a grid where you talk about welfare to organization versus welfare to customer, I'd say the first reality check is as long as behavioral interventions put you in this grid where it increases the value for your stakeholder as well as value for the org, go ahead, go for it, right? So we just did a project with a bank in Australia, a Commonwealth Bank, where they were trying to help people make better credit card choices. And people say, why would a bank want to do that, right? Don't they make money essentially screwing the customers, for want of a better term, right? And it's a bit more nuanced than that, right? If I let people make better credit card choices, they stay with me longer and my lifetime value goes up, right? And so that's where they were aiming to be. So yes, they can do it, but I think it requires lots of patience, B, a fair bit of experimental know-how in the organization. So we worked with them for over 3 years, building in platform for data collection, thinking through how to actually reduce the cost of experimentation overall. I think to me that's the big driver of everything, right? So as we know from economics, if the cost of anything goes down, the demand for that thing goes up, and the demand for substitutes goes down, right? And so in a corporate world, the easier I make it to experiment, the greater the demand for experimentation, for behavioral science, for design, everything that goes with it, the lower the demand for armchair theorizing and fancy consultants, right? Google. Okay? Again, bare web page. I think the first thing under our papers is a document called Embedding Behavioral Science in Organizations, something like that, right? Where we talk about all of these things. Yeah, definitely do it. 1 minute. Anyone has a question?
I have a question if no one else has a question.
Go for it.
So going to, you mentioned like you do work with companies that are for profit. I'm wondering if you've ever encountered a situation where, I guess, they've come to you for your expertise to design a nudge mitigation to help them sell something or someone to basically for their gain and not necessarily, I don't know, for the consumer's gain. What are your thoughts about, like, is that like a dilemma that you experience or?
Yeah, so it happens a lot. We don't get involved in it. That's our guiding model. We have 6 principles that push us towards that zone. And if it's any intervention designed to be anywhere else, either we're not interested or the company's not interested. So for example, if customer welfare goes up, but the org welfare goes down, they keep don't do it, right? But the other 2 diagonals, we just say no. It happens a lot, a heck of a lot. But yeah, so as long as you've got a rigorous set of ethical principles about what you will and will not do.
That's great.
Hey. All right, you guys know where to find me. So just send me either an email, you'll get a response at some point in time. If you tweet me, you'll get a response that day. But yeah, just reach out.